A routine morning descent into Amsterdam. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951, a state-of-the-art Boeing 737, was preparing to land. On board, 128 passengers, including 4 Boeing engineers, anticipated touching down. But in the final, critical moments, something went catastrophically wrong. The aircraft, instead of gliding, plummeted to the earth, smashing into a muddy field just north of runway 18 right. This wasn't just another accident, it was a terrifying mystery involving the world's most popular plane, and investigators needed answers fast. February 25, 2009. The quiet morning at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport was shattered by the sound of impact. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 had become the first plane to crash here in over a decade. The Boeing 737-800, en route from Istanbul, Turkey, struck the ground with such force that its fuselage ripped into 3 large pieces. Miraculously, the engines lay forward of the main wreckage, still somewhat intact. Rescue workers, quick to the scene, found survivors amidst the devastation, rushing them to local hospitals. News of the disaster spread globally, adding to a chilling trend of recent passenger jet accidents. The sudden, inexplicable nature of this event immediately piqued the Dutch Safety Board's concern. Joining them, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board dispatched lead investigator Miller, a seasoned expert, recognizing the gravity of an American-made aircraft's failure. This wasn't just any plane. The 737 was the backbone of global air travel, carrying millions daily. Uncovering the cause wasn't just about this flight, it was about the safety of aviation worldwide. 9 people had perished, including 3 members of the Boeing team and the pilots at the controls.
With the wreckage scattered but largely confined, investigators gleaned their first crucial insight. The plane hadn't been traveling at high speed horizontally. This suggested a landing incident, not a catastrophic mid-air failure. The engines, found surprisingly far forward, hinted they might have been producing thrust at impact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were recovered in excellent condition, promising a detailed account of the flight's final moments. Survivors reported a routine approach followed by a sudden, terrifying drop, as if the plane had simply fallen from the sky. No mention of trouble, just an abrupt descent. The lack of fire at the crash site presented an immediate puzzle. In many plane crashes, fuel ignites on impact. The absence of a blaze led to a chilling, yet quickly dismissed theory. Had Flight 1951 simply run out of fuel? The FDR quickly proved otherwise. The tanks held ample reserves. Attention then shifted to external factors. Passengers had reported turbulence just before the crash, prompting investigators to consider a microburst, a powerful downdraft that can slam low-flying aircraft to the ground. A Delta Airlines flight had tragically fallen victim to one in 1985 at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, but an analysis of the FDR's wind speed data provided no evidence of such a weather phenomenon. The winds were simply not strong enough to bring down a Boeing 737. The answer lay elsewhere, deep within the aircraft itself, and within the decisions made by the people flying it.
An unusual discovery emerged during the initial recovery efforts. There were 3 pilots in the cockpit, a rare occurrence for a 2-person flight deck. The CVR, once decoded, explained this anomaly. The flight was a training mission. Captain Rahman was instructing First Officer Demir on the complexities of landing at Schiphol Airport, known for its extensive procedures. Safety Officer Anya was present as a monitoring pilot, ensuring safety during the training. The CVR also unveiled a perplexing sound that began when the aircraft was still thousands of feet in the air, a landing gear configuration warning horn. Despite being at 8,300 feet, far too high for landing gear deployment, the alarm blared persistently. Captain Rahman, according to the recordings, repeatedly dismissed it, muttering, "It's just the radio altimeter." This casual dismissal of a critical warning was the first chilling piece of the puzzle. Investigators delved into the flight data recorder, focusing on the altimeters. Commercial aircraft are equipped with 2 types: pressure altimeters, which measure height above sea level using air pressure, and radio altimeters, which bounce signals off the ground to provide highly accurate height readings above terrain, especially crucial during landing. The Boeing 737 had both. The shocking revelation: the captain's radio altimeter, the one feeding information to Captain Rahman's display, had been malfunctioning throughout most of the approach.
Instead of showing the plane's actual altitude of several thousand feet, it consistently displayed a reading of -8 feet, indicating the plane was already on the ground. This erroneous reading was the direct cause of the persistent landing gear warning horn. Captain Rahman's dismissal now made sense. He believed he was dealing with a known nuisance. But this wasn't just a minor annoyance. The captain's faulty radio altimeter also supplied data to a critical automated system, the auto-throttle. The auto-throttle system manages engine power, while the autopilot handles altitude and direction. These two systems, while integrated, operate with some independence. Crucially, the auto-throttle relies on a single radio altimeter input, and in Flight 1951's case, it was the captain's malfunctioning unit. The pieces began to align. Unbeknownst to the crew, the auto-throttle, receiving the -8 feet reading, believed the plane was already touching down. This triggered the aircraft's flare mode, a pre-programmed sequence for landing where engine power is automatically reduced to idle and the nose pitches up slightly to soften the touchdown. The problem? Flight 1951 entered flare mode while still more than 1,000 feet above the ground, miles from the runway. The engines consequently went to idle. This insidious problem was not unprecedented. Maintenance logs revealed a history of altimeter issues on this very aircraft and across Turkish Airlines' 737 fleet. For over a year, the specific radio altimeter computers had been replaced multiple times due to faulty readings, including instances of the -8 feet error. Boeing itself had received thousands of reports of faulty radio altimeters, but concluded they weren't a safety threat because pilots had always been able to intervene. Indeed, in the 48 hours preceding the crash, this very plane had experienced the same altimeter failure twice, activating flare mode. In both instances, the crews noticed the discrepancy, disengaged the auto-throttles, manually increased engine power, and landed safely. Why was this time different?
Adding a critical layer of complexity to an already compromised situation was the air traffic control instruction. Controllers directed Flight 1951 to begin its final turn much closer to the runway than standard international guidelines suggested. At Schiphol, this slam-dunk approach was common, designed to expedite traffic. It meant the crew had to intercept the instrument landing system glide path from above, requiring a rapid descent and deceleration, effectively diving onto the glide slope. This maneuver significantly increased the flight crew's workload. As the plane closed in, about 17 kilometers out, it established a path to runway 18 right. The three pilots, already dealing with a persistent and seemingly benign warning horn, now faced the demanding task of stabilizing the aircraft for a steep, rapid approach. They were preparing for landing, configuring flaps and landing gear, while the faulty altimeter continued to mislead the auto-throttle. This combination proved lethal. The crew, expecting the plane to slow down naturally as they deployed flaps and made their steep descent, failed to notice that the auto-throttle, triggered by the phantom -8 feet, had already reduced engine power to idle. The plane was slowing down, but for the wrong and dangerous reason. The subtle reduction in engine noise and the visual cue of the throttles at idle were masked by the demanding workload and the expectation of a natural deceleration.
The CVR revealed the crew still running their pre-landing checklist well below 1,000 feet, a critical safety threshold by which all configurations and checks should be complete. At 700 feet, then 600, then 500, the aircraft was critically slow, dangerously close to a stall. The flight displays began flashing warnings, red bars, then flashing boxes around the airspeed indicator, screaming for attention. Yet, amidst the flurry of checklist items and the pressure of the slam-dunk approach, none of the three pilots perceived the dire situation. Their focus was on the immediate tasks at hand, not actively monitoring the primary flight parameters. By the time the stick shaker, a device designed to warn pilots of an impending stall, violently vibrated the control column, it was too late. Captain Rahman instinctively took control and pushed the throttles forward. But at a mere 400 feet above the ground, just 1.5 kilometers from the runway, the engines could not spool up fast enough. The Boeing 737, starved of power, fell out of the sky. It took only seconds to hit the ground. The official report into the crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 identified a convergence of circumstances, a rare and deadly chain of events, rather than a single catastrophic failure. The faulty radio altimeter was the trigger, leading the auto-throttle to inadvertently reduce engine power at a critical phase of flight. This malfunction, however, was compounded by the challenging slam-dunk approach assigned by air traffic control, which significantly increased pilot workload and compressed the time available for error detection.
Crucially, the investigation highlighted the flight crew's failure to adequately monitor airspeed. Despite multiple warnings from the flight displays, the pilots, distracted by the late checklist completion and the demanding approach, did not recognize the dangerously low speed until it was unrecoverable. They knew about the altimeter problem, but they failed to understand its potentially lethal interaction with the auto-throttle in this specific scenario. Boeing, while not entirely at fault, was urged to improve the reliability of the radio altimeter system and to ensure that a single instrument failure could not lead to such a cascade. The problem wasn't that pilots couldn't recover from a single failure, it was that the insidious nature of this particular malfunction, coupled with other stressors, obscured the true danger. This tragedy underscored a fundamental challenge in modern aviation: the complex relationship between human pilots and advanced automation. As aircraft become more sophisticated, pilots are increasingly tasked with monitoring rather than actively flying. While automation reduces workload and enhances safety in many aspects, it can also lull crews into a passive monitoring state. When something unexpected happens, the transition back to active control can be delayed or mismanaged, especially if the automation's actions are not clearly understood. This wasn't an isolated incident. In 1996, an Aero Peru 757 crashed into the Pacific Ocean as its crew struggled to decipher contradictory altitude and airspeed warnings caused by a maintenance error. In 1995, a Boeing 757 destined for Cali, Colombia, crashed into a mountain after the crew mistakenly reprogrammed the flight management system during a last-minute change. These incidents, much like Flight 1951, serve as cautionary tales. Advanced systems, if not properly understood or actively managed, can create new pathways to disaster.
Aviation experts like Mika Ensley emphasize that people are not naturally good at repetitive monitoring. Humans excel at problem-solving and creative solutions, but sustained, passive observation is not our strength. Therefore, the challenge lies in designing automation that keeps pilots actively engaged and in the loop, rather than pushing them to the periphery. The debate rages between manufacturers like Boeing, which prioritizes pilot decision-making with ample information, and Airbus, which gives more decision-making power to the flight computer to prevent human errors. The ultimate computer, however, remains the pilot. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 on that cold February morning was a sobering reminder that even with the most advanced technology, human vigilance remains paramount. It highlighted how a seemingly minor technical fault, when combined with a demanding operational environment and subtle cognitive biases in monitoring, can create a perfect storm. The pilots of Flight 1951 knew about the altimeter problem, but they didn't fully comprehend its potentially deadly impact. They were trained to fly a complex machine, but the machine, in a subtle yet critical way, was working against them. The enduring lesson from this tragedy, and countless others, echoes a fundamental principle in aviation: fly the jet. Regardless of how sophisticated the automation, the ultimate responsibility for safety rests with the human hands on the controls, who must continuously monitor, question, and if necessary, intervene to ensure the aircraft is doing what it's supposed to do. Their lives and the lives of everyone on board depend on it.